Picture this: the music world, always hungry for legends, has long embraced Janis Joplin as a tragic heroine of rock and roll. The blues-drenched voice, the raw power of her performances, the fragile soul hiding behind her raucous laughter. But today, Clive Davis, the man who helped shape some of the greatest stars of our time, has sent shockwaves through the industry by revealing some harsh truths about the icon everyone thought they knew.
First tune, the one we just did, it's about men.
And for the first time in years, the spotlight on Joplin is not the kind she would have wanted. Janis Joplin was an unstoppable force on stage, but off it her life was a swirling storm of addiction, anger, and unresolved pain. She was no stranger to controversy, burning bridges just as quickly as she built them. Her talent was undeniable, but so were her demons. Clive Davis, who had been instrumental in shaping her final album, Pearl, is now opening up about the darker side of Joplin's career. The fights, the betrayals, the self-destruction that overshadowed even her greatest successes. Behind the scenes, Janis wasn't just a misunderstood genius. She was volatile, difficult, and often out of control. Davis reveals that working with her was a gamble every single day. One moment she could be your best friend, the next your worst enemy. Her constant battles with executives, fellow musicians, and even friends made her a ticking time bomb. And while the world saw her as a free spirit, those closest to her knew that she was spiraling down a path she couldn't escape. If there was anyone who could match Janis Joplin's reckless energy, it was Jim Morrison. The frontman of The Doors was just as wild, just as unpredictable, and just as lost in his addictions. Their encounter at a party in Los Angeles is the stuff of rock and roll legend. But behind the scenes, it was far from glamorous. Morrison, known for his drunken antics and aggressive behavior, made a move on Janis, and she didn't take it lightly. What started as playful teasing quickly turned into a power struggle between two of rock's most rebellious figures. Morrison, always the provocateur, pushed her limits, but Janis wasn't the type to back down. The breaking point came when she grabbed a bottle of whiskey and smashed it over his head, leaving him stunned and bleeding on the floor. She stormed out of the party, leaving everyone in shock. Morrison, oddly fascinated, later claimed he had never met anyone like her.
For a carnival, and then I decided to hitchhike around the northern part of Brazil. And
it was a night that cemented her reputation as someone who refused to be messed with. But while the world saw her as fearless, those closest to her knew that her outbursts weren't just acts of defiance, they were cries for help. On stage, Janis Joplin and Grace Slick of Jefferson Airplane were the two undisputed queens of the San Francisco music scene. But behind the scenes, their relationship was far more complicated. Grace was everything Janis wasn't. Cool, composed, and effortlessly stylish. Janis, with her raw bluesy voice and chaotic presence, always felt like the outsider. They respected each other, but there was always an underlying tension. Janis envied Grace's natural poise, while Grace admired Janis's ability to pour her soul into every performance. But it wasn't long before jealousy took over. The press loved to pit them against each other, fueling the idea that only one could be the real queen of rock. At one particularly tense moment backstage, Janis accused Grace of being too perfect, claiming that she didn't have to fight for her place in the industry the way she had. Grace, never one to engage in unnecessary drama, simply walked away. But the resentment lingered. Though they never had a public falling out, it was clear to those around them that their relationship was one of silent competition rather than true friendship. And for Janis, who had spent her entire life trying to prove she was enough, the comparison was yet another wound that never truly healed. Before she became a solo sensation, Janis Joplin fronted Big Brother and the Holding Company, the band that helped catapult her to fame. But success came at a price. The moment Janis's star began to shine brighter than the rest of the band, tensions boiled over. The other members resented her growing fame, and she in turn felt held back by their lack of ambition. What had once been a close-knit musical family started to fracture under the weight of egos, expectations, and the inevitable pull of the industry. The final straw came after their breakthrough album Cheap Thrills, with songs like Piece of My Heart cementing Janis as a powerhouse vocalist. Record executives saw her potential, and they saw dollar signs. They didn't want Big Brother and the Holding Company. They wanted Janis Joplin, the solo star. The pressure mounted. Janis, torn between loyalty and her own dreams, struggled with the decision. She knew she was outgrowing the band, but leaving meant abandoning the people who had stood beside her from the beginning. When she finally made the decision to go solo, it wasn't just a career move, it was a devastating fracture. Big Brother saw it as a cold betrayal, a rejection of the years they had spent struggling together. The bitterness was palpable. Band members accused her of selling out, of letting fame get to her head. She in turn felt abandoned by the very people who should have been happy for her. The fights were ugly, and the departure left wounds that would never fully heal. She had won her freedom, but at a heartbreaking cost. Even as she stood at the pinnacle of success, something felt missing. She had the fame, the adoration, and the opportunities she had always dreamed of, but she had lost a family. Even at the height of her career, Janis always felt like she was searching for a place to belong. Long before she became the queen of rock and roll, Janis Joplin was a small-town girl from Port Arthur, Texas. But her childhood was anything but idyllic. She was the misfit, the odd one out, bullied relentlessly for her looks and her refusal to conform. The taunts were cruel. Classmates called her ugly, ridiculed her deep voice, and mocked her wild, untamed personality. She sought refuge in music, but even that wasn't enough to shield her from the loneliness that gnawed at her daily. At home, things weren't much easier. Her family, though supportive in their own way, never truly understood her. Her parents wanted her to be normal, to settle down, to stop chasing dreams that seemed too wild to ever come true. Her mother, Dorothy, was especially critical, urging Janis to tone down her eccentricities and act like a lady. Her father, Seth, was quieter in his disapproval, but still wished his daughter would take a more conventional path. The rejection she felt within her own home cut deep, reinforcing the idea that she simply didn't belong anywhere. As she grew older, her desperate need for acceptance drove her to extremes. She would do anything to prove to the world, and to herself, that she was worth loving. But the more she chased validation, the more she spiraled into self-destruction. The booze, the heroin, the reckless affairs, each was an attempt to fill the gaping void that had been carved into her heart long before she ever stepped onto a stage. Even when she achieved fame, the scars of her past never faded. Every performance, every raucous laugh, every defiant act was a mask, covering the unshakable wound she carried inside, the suffocating belief that she would never, ever be enough. And as the years passed, that belief only grew stronger, until it finally consumed her. Janis Joplin's life was a whirlwind of brilliance and destruction. She fought the industry, she fought the people around her, and, most of all, she fought herself. Every step forward was accompanied by a force trying to drag her down, whether it was addiction, self-doubt, or the never-ending weight of loneliness that clung to her like a shadow. She burned bridges, she made enemies, and she left behind a trail of broken hearts and unfinished dreams. But through it all, she created music that still touches souls decades later. Her legacy is as turbulent as her life. For every person who idolized her, there was another who condemned her wild ways. Some saw her as a fearless rebel, a woman who broke the mold and paved the way for female rock stars to follow. Others saw only the mess, the drunken performances, the erratic behavior, the spiraling self-destruction that made her both legendary and tragic. Even now, decades after her untimely death, she remains one of the most polarizing figures in rock and roll history. Clive Davis's revelations have reopened old wounds, but they also remind the world of an undeniable truth. Janis Joplin was not a saint, nor was she meant to be one. She was raw, untamed, and unpredictable, a force of nature that couldn't be controlled, only observed in awe and fear. She lived fast, burned bright, and left this world far too soon. But perhaps that is exactly why we still can't stop talking about her. She was not meant to fade away quietly. She was meant to leave an impact, to shake the foundations of the music industry, and to remind us that some stars burn too intensely to last.